In America, a new trend is catching on. People are buying groceries on EMIs. And no, this is not some finance trend. Many households are in distress. Inflation is squeezing their monthly budget, so people are buying food by taking out a loan. They're using instant credit apps, buy now, pay later schemes, also called as BNPL, buy now, pay later. You must have heard about this. It's the hottest trend in finance. You buy something today on a loan. You get what you need on the same day, but you don't have to make the payment. You can split your bill in easy installments and pay the loan over a period of time. Now, buy now, pay later is not a new idea, really. People use it all the time to get their favorite gadgets, to buy appliances, or for a big ticket purchase like a car. But buying food on EMI is a sign of financial pain. It usually means you don't have enough money in your pocket today. You're going into debt just to put food on your plate. American households have been going through this pain for some time. Let's look at the numbers. How many Americans use buy now, pay later apps? About 50% according to a survey. Out of these, 1 in 5 use apps to get groceries. 27% Americans use these loans as a bridge just to get through the month before the next paycheck lands in their accounts. They take out a loan. Now let's look at the breakup of these loans to understand how BNPL, buy now, pay later money is spent. In the first 2 months of 2023, 40% of BNPL loans were issued on groceries, 40%, 38% on home furnishings, 8% on apparel. So groceries had the highest share, 40%. And clearly there's a problem here. How did Americans end up with no money? It began during the pandemic. Many households needed financial support, so they turned to these apps because they're very easy to use. Getting loan is as easy as installing an app and signing up. In 2019, buy now, pay later loans amounted to just $2 billion. In 2021, this number had shot up to $24 billion, and that's a jump of more than 1,000%. So BNPL loans became popular during the pandemic. What happened next made them a necessity for American households. Inflation skyrocketed in the US. Last year in July, America reported its highest inflation in 4 decades. And this has a direct impact on prices of household goods. In December, grocery prices were up by almost 12%. Prices of eggs shot up by 138%. Butter sticks, 38.5%. All-purpose flour, 34.5%. Spaghetti and macaroni, 31.3%. That's the kind of price rise Americans had to deal with. Monthly expenses of many families doubled. They simply struggled to make ends meet. So they had to resort to these instant loans, buy now, pay later schemes, and credit cards. Now, inflation has begun to cool, but it's leaving many households in debt, and some are struggling to keep up with their payments. Again, I have some numbers. At the end of 2022, Americans had $986 billion worth of credit card debt. $986 billion. In the last 3 months of 2022, credit card debt had surged by $61 billion. It's the largest quarterly jump in history. So we have loans for basic needs and high levels of debt. And these are classic signs of financial distress. Just ask yourself this question. Would you buy a sandwich on a loan? If you had the money, perhaps you wouldn't. You would avoid falling into debt over a sandwich. But American households seem trapped in a debt cycle. They're taking loans to make ends meet. And this never ends well. The great power rivalry has a new front. The cold, icy terrain of the Antarctic. China is making moves even in the Antarctic. And what is China doing there? Building a base to snoop on its rivals. So first the balloons, then the secret police stations, and now surveillance bases in the Antarctic. Clearly, China is very serious about spying and control. It is building its 5th station in the Antarctic. It already has 4 stations. Now a 5th one is coming up. Let me show you some satellite images. This is where the new Chinese station is coming up. This is the Inexpressible Island. It's the name of an island in Antarctica, Inexpressible. It's a small rocky island near the Ross Sea. On first impressions, this looks like a major facility. Some reports have also emerged. They reveal China's construction plans. They say the new station will have an observatory with a satellite ground station, sites for energy generation, areas for research, a helipad, and a logistics hub. What will China do with such a large facility? The West has its suspicions. It believes China will use it to snoop on the region. The equipment on the site might serve a dual purpose: scientific research and spying. And how does that work? Reports say this base could potentially intercept satellites of other nations. Which other nations? Let's pull out the map to understand. This is the site of China's next station on the Antarctic. Now let's zoom out. What do you see on the north? Australia and New Zealand. If China starts snooping from the new site, Australia and New Zealand will be the obvious targets. The Chinese base is well positioned. From here, China can intercept signals and gather intel on Australia and New Zealand. It can track the rockets launched from Australia. And here's something you should know. China's presence and interest in the Antarctic is not new, but the threat perception is. China has been working in the region since the 1980s. It has built 4 bases here over the years. 4 bases, this is going to be the 5th one. Beijing calls them scientific research centers. But the US has its doubts. In 2022, the US Defense Department published a report. It was about the Chinese military, but it also had a section on China's presence in Antarctica. Listen to what it said. China's strategy for Antarctica includes the use of dual-use technologies, facilities, and scientific research, which are likely intended, at least in part, to improve the PLA's capabilities. The PLA, of course, is the Chinese Army, the People's Liberation Army. That's the Chinese strategy according to the US. Is this even legal? The answer is no. There are clear rules of operation in this region. We're talking about the Antarctic Treaty of 1959. It spells out 3 rules. All activities on the Antarctic must be peaceful. Military personnel are allowed on the continent, but only to participate in scientific research. They cannot engage in military activities like setting up bases, carrying out maneuvers, or testing weapons. All of this is not allowed. And China is party to this treaty from 1959. But then again, China is not famous for following rules. Now, for most of us, the Antarctic is a massive patch of land covered in ice, a place where no one can live. But the fact is, the Antarctic is a crowded place. At least 30 countries have stations in the region. 30 countries, including India. India, too, has a base there. Do you know how many bases there are in all? At least 82. According to one estimate, there are 82 bases, so the Antarctic is getting crowded. The question is why? Why are so many countries interested in this cold and remote region? 2 reasons: strategic and economic. Antarctica sits at a crucial point on the map. It falls in the middle of 3 key oceans: the Atlantic, the Indian Ocean, and the Pacific Ocean. And this makes the Antarctic a critical point for satellite communications, for surveillance, and also for navigation, which is why so many countries want a piece of the Antarctic. The second reason, like I said, is economic. And on this front, too, the Antarctic could have a huge potential. None of this has been proven yet, but several experts say this region has billions of barrels of oil. It has rich reserves of natural gas, even precious minerals like gold and platinum. As of now, drilling is not allowed in this region. The Antarctic Treaty prohibits it. But these rules could change in the year 2048. That's when the treaty comes up for review. And that's what countries like China are waiting for. When this treaty expires, anything could happen. Countries could even push for Antarctica to be divided. So science is just a proxy for geopolitics here. The real game is about dictating the future of the Antarctic. The race is already on. China's expansion is aimed at the future. It would want to control large parts of this region. The West will push back and a new battleground will emerge. They say everyone's a star on social media, everyone's an influencer. They talk about a whole range of stuff nowadays: travel destinations, cosmetics, food, almost anything under the sun. It's not ideal, but tolerable. What's not tolerable is the recent trend of health influencers. You may have heard about the recent Vita Controversy. Vita is a household name in India. It is marketed as a health drink for children. It is supposed to turn boring old milk into something exciting. but not according to a health influencer. His name is Revant Himatsingka. He uploaded this video about the harmful effects of Bonvita. 3 claims stood out. 1, Bonvita is high on sugar, which could lead to diabetes. 2, it has cocoa solids and caffeine. And 3, it has a cancer-causing colorant. Now, just to be clear, these claims were not backed by scientific evidence, so naturally Bonvita sued. They accused the influencer of defaming the drink and spreading panic. They also said that Bonvita fits all regulatory standards. The lawsuit spooked the influencer. He deleted the video soon after, but by then more than 12 million people had seen the clip. It had gone viral across platforms. Last we checked, his Twitter account had been hacked and then suspended. Why? Well, that's a mystery for another day. For the moment, let's focus on Bonvita. Who would you say is right? The influencer or Bonvita? Well, I'm afraid neither. If you study the Bonvita packet, it's clear that they have added sugar, 7.5 grams per serving, which is around 1.5 teaspoons. Quick side note, the recommended sugar intake for children is 6 teaspoons. So 1 glass of Bonvita takes up 25% of the permissible sugar. Is that too much? Take a look at your child's diet and you will get the answer. So denial won't help Bonvita here. The fact is, their drink does have added sugar. Now let's come to the health benefits. Bonvita claims that their drink will increase muscle growth and boost immunity. They say it has been proven scientifically. But experts are not convinced. Many doctors claim these studies and trials are not 100% accurate. And frankly, it should not surprise us. MNCs are not exactly famous for honest marketing. Remember when cigarettes were called healthy? Or when New Balance shoes were supposed to burn calories? These are classic examples of false advertising. Bonvita could be doing the same. In most cases, such claims are busted as time goes by. There are more studies, more awareness, and more checks. We saw that with colas too. There is now a universal acceptance that colas are sugar plus water. Now let's turn to the influencer. Clearly, he was trying to raise awareness among parents. There doesn't seem to be any malice. Having said that, should we be discussing children's health on Reels? Surely dedicated agencies would do a better job. The fact is, literally anyone can pretend to be a health influencer. And you can see why that's a problem. Many US colleges have already sounded an alarm. One study found that more than 70% Americans have been exposed to medical misinformation. 82% of that came from social media. Chances are India's numbers will be no different. Recently, the Indian government has tried to correct this. They've asked influencers to display their credentials and qualifications. And that will certainly help. But ultimately, it comes down to you and your sense of judgment. Reels are not a substitute for consulting a doctor. Read the packets yourself. Visit a doctor if you have doubts. That's the only way to get accurate medical information. As for Bonvita's outrage and legal offensive, I'll take it with a pinch of salt or sugar, I guess. I could start our next story with a knock-knock joke, but I won't, as it will probably be met with silence. Because this story is about Japan. The East Asian nation is turning into a ghost town. You already know that its population is shrinking. It fell by 500,000 last year. Deaths are rising while birth rates are sinking. And this has bred a new problem. The island nation is now home to millions of vacant houses. They sit empty and unlit in suburbs and rural areas alike, surrounded by overgrown, unkempt gardens. And there's about 11 million of them. The situation is so bad that the government has stepped in. But now these antique homes have a niche clientele. They have found their place in the luxury market. Here's a report.
Who wouldn't like to live in an antique Japanese home? Especially if it's being sold for a few $1,000s. But here's the catch. It may have a terrible rot. Its roof could collapse at any moment. And it's probably under attack by unruly weeds. We're talking about the island nation's abandoned empty houses. And the Japanese have a name for them. They're known as Akiya. And now they've become the country's newest problem. Because a housing crisis is haunting Japan, turning it into a ghost town much faster. they already have a demographic crisis. Their population fell for the 12th consecutive year. Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida said if this continues, Japan will disappear. It has one of the lowest birth rates in the world, but also one of the highest life expectancies. And last year, twice as many people died as were born. So now, millions of houses are vacant. Japan has a glut of unclaimed properties. The most recent government data is from 5 years ago. It reported 8 million vacant homes across the country. That's about 14% of their overall housing stock. But experts say this number has drastically increased. Now it stands at 11 million. And in the next decade, over 30% of all houses in Japan could be empty. The population crisis definitely plays a role here, but there are other reasons for this too. There is a valuation problem. Houses in Japan decrease in value over time. Eventually, they're worthless. Only the land retains value. So owners don't want to maintain an aging house. There is little incentive. There is an inheritance problem too. Homes are being abandoned by the heirs of previous owners. And some homeowners die without ever naming an inheritor. Others leave the properties to relatives who refuse to sell simply out of respect for the elders. And while the Akiya continue to wither away, they don't suffer in silence. They are potentially hazardous and prone to collapsing. Not to mention, they also mar the scenery. But experts say they're also threatening the emotional health of Japan, as they've sparked numerous family disputes. But now authorities are stepping up. Consultants are helping squabbling families, and the government is also giving these homes a push. They're subsidizing demolitions, collecting neighborhood reports on maintenance, holding awareness programs, and allowing local authorities to raise property taxes on Akiya. They're also compiling listings of vacant houses, calling them Akiya banks, due to which these abandoned homes have found a new love. They've caught the eye of foreign clients who appreciate Japanese homes like its residents can't. And now these homes have become luxury properties. International buyers are snapping them up. They want to preserve the cultural integrity of Japan's antique homes, and they're buying them for tens of thousands of dollars. Akiyas are being renovated. Sometimes they become homes to new families. Other times they're Airbnb rentals, because one person's decrepit can be another's cultural uniqueness.
Our next story is about child labor. Which country or what kind of society comes to mind? A sweatshop in South Asia or a mine in Africa? Well, we're not talking about these tonight. We're talking about child labor in America, the United States of America. They're making child labor legal. They're passing laws to allow children to do all kinds of jobs, even serve alcohol on night shifts. They're passing bills to enable this. Why? Because the US has a shortage of labor, and children can be used as cheap labor. What about child rights? Well, it's America. They can justify anything. And they have a justification for this one too. The lawmakers say children need work experience. Can you beat that? It's as absurd and exploitative as it sounds. State after state in the US is trying to pass laws that will crush child rights. Let me explain with what happened in Iowa. The state Senate has passed a bill. It's inconspicuously called Senate File 542. It allows 14 and 15-year-olds to work 6-hour night shifts until 9 p.m. during the school year and 11 p.m. during vacations. 16 and 17-year-olds will be able to work as long as adults. And what will they be doing? Not just the usual jobs of waiting tables and babysitting. Anyone above 15 will be able to work in assembly lines. You heard that right. They'll assemble goods or pack meat. And we aren't joking about the meat. Kids will now be able to work in jobs previously banned for minors, even dangerous jobs. As long as they're part of an approved training program, they can do these jobs. So expect to see internship offers from mines and meat packing plants for children. And what happens if the child gets injured? Initially, employers were going to get complete immunity, but then there was a heated debate in the Senate. So now children will be able to seek compensation. This was one of the compromises made to bring back child labor in the state of Iowa. Of course, injury is not the only danger that children will be exposed to. 16-year-olds will now be able to serve alcohol at restaurants. Yes, by all means, let teenagers handle booze on late-night shifts. What could possibly go wrong? The bill is not law yet. For that, it must be passed by the House of Representatives. But reports say it has enough supporters, including the state's Restaurant Association, an industry association, also a grocery chain called Hy-Vee. Incidentally, this chain has been fined over $700,000 since the year 2000. What for? For over 30 labor law violations, including child labor violations. Of course, they support this law. And these are examples from just one American state. It's pretty much the same across the board. Child labor has been increasing dramatically since the pandemic. Just last year, violations increased by 37%. And what solution did American lawmakers come up with? Make it easier for companies to exploit children, to hire them, to make them work. Last month, the state of Arkansas passed a law. Companies there no longer legally are obligated to verify the age of teenage staff. Now, legally, children under 14 are not allowed to work. But now there's a new law. So they can employ preteens and then they can say they did not know the age. In New Jersey, 16-year-olds can now work for 50 hours a week without parental or school consent. This is up from the previous 40 hours. At least 11 states in the US are trying to weaken child labor protections, many because of a labor shortage. They say they need more workers. And so they enlist children and claim that the move benefits children. It helps them learn the value of money, they say. Of course, there's also a catch. The money won't always be fair. Let's look at the state of Nebraska. The minimum wage there is $10.50 per hour. It will raise to $15 per hour by the year 2026, but not for child workers. A bill introduced in January wants minors to get lower wages. So they'll serve as cheap labor. Now put all of this together. Added working hours, lack of age verification, no restrictions on dangerous jobs, and lower wages. It shows the US is heading down a dark path where corporations will exploit children and reap profits. The land of the free is regressing into the land of free reign by corporations, a land where the rights of children be damned. Our last story tonight is about the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. It's a collection of marine debris in the North Pacific Ocean. And that's a fancy way to put it. It's basically litter that ended up in the ocean. Think of it as oceanic soup of plastic fragments or a large swirl of garbage. Over 620,000 square miles of it, like a plastic island. For starters, it does not seem like a hospitable place. It is poor in nutrients. It's 1,000 miles away from the nearest streak of land, somewhere between California and Hawaii, where obviously the heat is unrelenting. Yet, it is bursting with life. Dozens of marine species have migrated to this garbage patch, and none of these creatures belong to the open ocean. They're all coastal animals. Yet they're thriving by clinging to plastic. Here's a report.
There is an island of trash floating in the Pacific Ocean. It's called the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. It's the largest accumulation of ocean plastic in the world. It weighs 80,000 tons. It's spread over 1.6 million square kilometers. So it's twice the size of states like Texas. And it's like a garbage vortex, pulling all sorts of trash towards its center and keeping it there. You can fish out toothbrushes, nets, ropes, and even broken bottle shards. So it should be a barren wasteland, right? After all, it has 1.8 trillion pieces of plastic. It's an environmental disaster. But ironically, it's teeming with life. A new study proves this. Animals are migrating to this garbage patch, and these are dozens of marine species. None of these creatures belong here. 80% of them are coastal animals, so they usually reside on nutrient-rich shores. But somehow, they've learned to survive in the open sea. And this plastic patch, it's not just a haven for coastal animals, it's also home for open sea animals, like sea snails and blue button jellyfish. Now, coastal and open sea ecosystems are coexisting. They've created a single ecosystem for themselves. Also, a single food chain, because there's definitely competition for space. For example, coastal animals like sea anemones on this patch are eating sea snails, and coastal animals are also reproducing here. This means they have set up permanent residence, even if it's a plastic-based home. And this is shocking for biologists. Coastal species can travel on ships and floating debris, but they can't be out at sea for long, and they most certainly don't create communities there. That's usually because of a number of reasons, including differences in temperature, salinity, and availability of nutrients. But what seemed difficult earlier is clearly possible. Coastal species can make a go at the ocean, as long as they have something to anchor themselves to, even if it's garbage. But as interesting as this is, it's also scary. Coastal species are finding new places. They're taking hold of them, which means they're becoming invasive, threatening native life in the ocean. And apart from disrupting ecosystems, this is also an ecological hazard because it's a dirty, stinky beacon of plastic pollution in the ocean. The world already produces about 460 million tons of plastic a year. This could triple by 2060. So ocean pollution needs urgent action. And over the last few decades, many cleanliness drives have been up to the task, setting their eyes on this garbage patch. But after this research, cleaning it won't be easy, because removing the plastic from this patch would mean uprooting animal life. Sounds like marine biologists are stuck between trash and a hard place. Patching up this garbage patch needs cleaning with creativity.
So, where are you investing?
Oh, China, it's just growing.
It's always been the manufacturing hub. Besides, India's struggling post-COVID.
Of course.
Sir, actually India's management of COVID has been much better. China's situation till date is unclear. After zero COVID lockdowns, China is gradually losing its supremacy as manufacturing leader. The country's share of global exports of footwear, furniture, or clothing accessories has fallen since 2016. Meanwhile, India has bounced back. So by the looks of it,
India could become the global manufacturing hub by 2030. Presenting Vantage with me, Palki Sharma, a first of its kind global show with an Indian perspective.